First of all, we'd like to thank eTabs for sponsoring this session. eTabs bringing cutting-edge automated charting for your projects in PowerPoint and Google Slides. So thanks to them, and thanks very much to Abbey Teunis of Embark Insight for being our first sharer of knowledge, and she's talking on thriving in the health and wellness industry. If you've got questions that come up during her talk, if you'd like to pop them in the chat, then Abbey will answer them at the end. Okay, so yeah, over to you. I'll make you presenter. And
great. Well, while Lynn is doing that, okay, I'm just going to put the presentation up on the screen. Can everyone see that?
Yes, thank you. And if we could all, oh, you have all muted yourselves. I'll mute myself.
Is that in presenter mode, or can you see my screen with everyone's pictures? I can't quite work out what everyone's seeing.
What we can see is there's a line above your screen which shows all the pictures, and you can make that smaller by dragging the line up, and then your page is so I can make you very tiny. Can you see that?
Hopefully that is now. Hopefully everyone can now see the presentation.
Yeah. Well, I certainly can, so hopefully everybody else can. Any problem?
Excellent. So, as the title implies, this is all about thriving in the health and wellness industry, and really it's about helping our clients, I guess, thrive in the health and wellness industry. So to that end, what I want to take you through is starting with a bit of a viewpoint on the size of the prize, I guess, and how big the opportunity is in this space. And in order to answer that, I've taken a step back and looked at how we can actually define that industry. And in fact, I'm actually going to be so bold as to call it a space rather than an industry, and you'll see why shortly. From there, I'm going to look at what those opportunities are, and specifically putting the lens on that of what are some of the key trends in the industry influencing what the industry looks like and how our clients can take advantage of the opportunities that are available moving forward right now. So I'll be looking at 4 key trends that I've been seeing businesses, I guess, having the biggest impact on at the moment. So it's obviously not a fully exhaustive list, but 4 key trends that are influencing the industry. And with that, I'll take a perspective on what that means from a consumer perspective, what that means from a business and a brand perspective. And then I'll share some real world case studies of how businesses are, I guess, responding to that, how it's manifesting in the business sense, both from some strategic stuff, some structure stuff, and then from a marketing perspective. And then I sort of feel like at the moment I'd be a little bit remiss not to wrap up with a very brief perspective on responsible marketing practices in light of the cost of living crisis and everything that's going on, and how this may or may not be impacting consumers in the industry. So when I first started putting this presentation together, I had this idea that I'd share some stats on some new product launches, initiatives in the health and wellness category, kind of creating a backdrop for everything that is and has been going on leading up to where we are today. Anyway, as I set out collecting this data, I realized that was taking an overly simplified view on it, because the industry is growing and evolving dramatically. So yes, of course, there were many new launches that were brought to market last year and in the years, let's say even in the last 3 years. But many of these were evolutions and extensions of already successful products. So take an example of a Peloton video game called Lane Breaker, which was gamifying workouts. So that wasn't necessarily something massively new. So it kind of started looking like talking about launches made it a little bit simplified. Not to mention how many thousands of products are launched every single year. And whether that comes from new businesses or existing ones, for example, this is a strategic area for Unilever, but many of these launches, even with a successful launch, aren't necessarily here in the years to come. But really, the main point I wanted to make was what a huge opportunity this space is. And I really do believe it's a space rather than a sector or an industry. If we just look at the image on the screen here, which was created by the Global Wellness Institute in their attempt to provide a definition for this industry, it is made up of so many different components that we haven't necessarily traditionally thought of as health and wellness. And you can see with that comes an enormous value. $4.5 trillion is what they estimate the global wellness economy to be valued at. And it is made up of so many different parts, and this is constantly evolving. So, for example, wellness tourism, the big pink one in the middle at $639 billion, that was only added into the Global Wellness Institute's definition this year. So it is a constantly evolving and huge space. And it's also growing. So they estimate the compound annual growth rate at over 6%. Other sources put it at higher than that, but it is an industry or a space, like I said, that is constantly growing. There's a huge opportunity in that. But not only is it growing, but the scope is also growing, and it's ever expanding and it's ever changing. So you take something like mindfulness. In 2018, mindfulness wasn't actually considered part of the health and wellness industry. So we're constantly seeing new definitions emerging of what the whole industry actually is. But what this means for our clients is that their competitors are constantly evolving, and what they think of as somebody competing for their money today is changing and constantly shifting as the time and the consumer involvement in the category goes on. How brands in turn are responding to that is by shifting their own definitions of that. So as they identify unique positions to occupy in the space, they're actually shifting the definition of the industry as well. And a really great example of this is Trip. So Trip is a CBD drink, and it is also a CBD oil. The drink is promoted as a non-alcoholic alternative to relaxation. Basically, their promotional activity is all around relaxation, but without the hangover. So that's talking to a very specific occasion. CBD oil, on the other hand, obviously is not about an occasion per se. You're not sitting down and relaxing with a few drops of CBD oil. So they are in a space where they are sort of straddling multiple traditional sectors. So instead of classifying themselves as health and personal care, like their competitors Love Hemp and Vitality CBD, or like a food and beverage competitor, Goodrays did, which is also a CBD drink, they view themselves as a mental health care product. So when you start thinking about that shifting definition, what it means for their competitors starts changing. But it's not only their competitors that then start changing with these definitions, it's also about category cues, it's about heuristics, it's about how consumers are interacting with and identifying the different brands in the sector. So from a research perspective, understanding how this is constantly shifting, how these definitions are moving, does influence how we approach the research massively, making it quite complex. And finally, these lines are blurring, and a great example of this is the wellness tourism industry or space in any event. So wellness tourism was not something that I was particularly aware of, but basically it is where existing businesses like the Radisson or Shangri-La take their existing offering, hotels, and they have expanded this into the wellness space. So they are really blurring the lines of the industry. So not only is it growing, not only is it expanding to encompass new things, but the entire industry is changing and shifting in terms of what it is. And ultimately, yes, the future is bright. There are enormous opportunities to be found, but we need to be mindful of how that space is evolving when we come to researching it. So now that we've got a perspective on what the industry may or may not be, I kind of thought maybe because of the fact that it's so constantly evolving, perhaps the better way of looking at it is looking at how consumers view it. And I think how McKinsey has broken it down is a really good viewpoint on the consumer needs that are driving all of those evolutions in the industry. So they've broken it down into these 6 key areas. The first being better health. So this is all about a sort of holistic health and what it means to be living better beyond traditional medicine and beyond supplements. So it includes medical devices, remote healthcare, personal health trackers. It includes digestive health like the brand Agulp, and it includes female health like the app Moody Month. The second area is better fitness. So obviously during COVID, we saw people struggling to maintain their fitness levels and the rise of at-home fitness. Better fitness, next up being better nutrition. So this has always fallen under wellness, especially in the weight loss space. But now consumers are expecting more from what they're putting in. This is functional food, so they're expecting benefits from the food that they're actually eating. They're very conscious of what they are putting into their bodies nutritionally in order to perform better ultimately. Better appearance is the fourth dimension that McKinsey identifies, and this is where things like apparel have typically sat. So brands like Lululemon, but now this as a space is evolving from a consumer need perspective to also include how they look from what they're putting in. So, wanting to have glossy and shiny hair, glowing skin, stronger nails. So what are they actually putting in to make everything look and feel better? Better sleep is the fifth dimension, and this goes beyond traditional sleep assistance like melatonin to app-enabled sleep trackers, to sleep products like the Bose Sleep Buds on screen, and products like This Works sleep spray. Finally, better mindfulness is the sixth dimension, and these are really owned by the meditation apps like Headspace and Calm. So with that in mind and that sort of viewpoint on what the industry is, and now that we know that there's such an opportunity there, having a look on where we've come from. So at the start of 2022, we were emerging out of the pandemic. It felt like, in any event, that consumers were feeling a lot more optimistic. But 2022 proved to be a year of significant challenge, and specifically two key things that have influenced, most parts of consumer life, but the Ukraine war and the cost of living crisis with rising energy bills and rising inflation. So it has meant that as we came into 2023, we were sort of already aware of the fact that we were approaching the year of the value shopper. You can see from the data here from Dynata that on balance, people in the UK were feeling slightly more pessimistic than optimistic. So, yes, obviously, this is where we've come from. And coming in then at the start of this year, we all knew that it was going to be the year of the value shopper. And so some Dynata data just to support that around how optimistic or not consumers in the UK were feeling at the start of the year about both just generally life as well as their finances. And you can see there a lot of people were feeling that their finances would be much or a little worse than a year ago, with 60% of us being concerned about inflation and rising costs. The reason I wanted to share this is not because it's new news, but rather that it's important to remember that this doesn't mean that it's therefore a race to the bottom or going to lead to promotion and price wars. And in fact, consumers are looking for more than cheap. They're looking for value. They're looking for quality. And I think that there's a huge opportunity for our brands, our clients that we're working with, to actually help their consumers navigate the space. So yes, there are a lot of wins to be made in the sector, but there's an argument that as an industry, the health and wellness industry may in fact be a pretty resilient sector, certainly more so than other industries. And in fact, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that it may in fact weather the storm, much like the so-called lipstick effect. And that as a lower price point, as a lower barrier to entry, it is something that can be a pick-me-up, help people feel better about themselves with a small treat. But there's another argument for it. Is it perhaps that as we're becoming more and more accustomed to this baseline way of living, that as an industry it's moving beyond a nice to have to something that's a lot more functional, a thing that you do every day to function better, to feel better, and even something that might help people cope mentally with everything that a potential recession and the cost of living crisis is going to throw at us. So there's an argument to say that perhaps as we enter a challenging economic year, that things like mental health and feeling good about ourselves are going to be even more important. So what I wanted to talk about today specifically is how brands can win in this space. And by talking about that, I wanted to look at 4 key trends that I've seen businesses having a huge amount of impact with. So what I'm going to do is I've got the 4 key trends. I will give a short overview of each one and what it means from the consumer perspective. Then I'll give some suggestions for strategies and tactics for brands to respond to that. And obviously they are more thought starters than anything else, as it totally depends on the business itself and what their structure is, what their brand proposition is, etc. And then I'll share some real world case studies of businesses living it up. As I said at the start, this is not an exhaustive list of trends. So these are just the ones that I'm seeing huge impact in the industry. And it's also not to say that there aren't different mass market behaviors at play. So these are very much at the disruptor end of the spectrum. So the first trend is social responsibility. I'm sure a couple of you have probably nodded, maybe you're agreeing, but this isn't new news. This isn't something that is going to shake up your perspective on this particular industry. It is a trend that has been building for some time. It's a trend that I have seen across multiple industries. But the reason I wanted to share it is that it is something that customers are becoming so aware of, especially as they become more aware of their own impact on the planet. And as they do so, they are looking for products that can help them reduce their own impact. But from their perspective, this isn't just about the environment. So in the past, when we've spoken about sustainability, it's been about the environment. This is taking a much wider perspective on that and looking at the community, the employees, it's about equity. So it's really taking a much broader view on it. And it really does come back to, from a brand perspective, what their brand purpose is and how we can actually live that. So some strategies from the brand perspective is around adopting broader social purpose. It's about looking at how they can take responsibility for the impact that they're having on the wider society and obviously the environment, and highlighting any sustainable and eco-friendly efforts that they have. But all of this has to be done with authenticity. You know, companies can't just rely on sustainable products that they have that might be lower in quality or more expensive. It really has to be combining sustainability with quality and value, because from what I've seen, consumers might say that this is something that they're more and more interested in, but if any of the other attributes aren't there, then they're not going to go and support that business. So it's not sustainability at all costs. And the other thing is that consumers are going to be demanding more and more proof of this if companies are going to claim that this is part of their broader purpose. So the three examples I wanted to share today, the first is bulk. So bulk is was a protein powder. They rebranded recently from bulk powders to just being bulk. And as part of that rebrand strategy, they took two perspectives on it. The first was all around why they rebranded. So moving from bulk powders to being bulk was about being more inclusive and about championing and celebrating everyone's efforts to be their very best, rather than just people that were really interested in hardcore exercising. And with that came a diversification of their products. And secondly, they invested in and promoted very heavily their sustainable packaging. So they claim that over 90% of their packaging is made from sustainable alternatives, whether that's by removing all single-use plastics, using home compostable materials, or highly recyclable materials. So that was example number one. Vital Proteins, as the name implies, is a multivitamin company. Excuse me. That is all about helping people look and feel their best. But they took the strategic step to get a B Corp certification. So if you know anything about this, it's an extremely rigorous review that looks at every single component of their business. And so where they actually did get that certification was on things like 59% of their managerial works are women, more than 50% of their energy use is from low impact renewable sources, and up to 74% of product and packaging materials are made from recyclable or biodegradable materials. So when they made the strategic step to go for that certification, they had to make sure that they were able to support it across just about every element of their business. And finally, Dancing Cow and their sub-brand Oatish is one of my favorite examples of social responsibility. It's an Indian dairy-free alternative, Oatish, as the name implies, being oat milk. And they decided to put their money where their mouth was in terms of reducing the impact of farmed animals. So I'm going to read what they do in order to pledge to their brand proposition. On selling every 10,000 litres of Oatish, we plan to rescue one milking animal in the dairy industry. For every 1,000 litres of Oatish sold, we plan to donate 5% of profits to an NGO. On every 100 litres of sale, we plan to plant 3 trees, and for every 10 litres of Oatish sold, we will add 10 bricks to our sanctuary. And the sanctuary is where they will ultimately house the milking animals that they have saved. So these are just 3 really great examples of how brands are really responding to this trend around having a broader viewpoint on social responsibility. The next trend is around personalization. So this is really coming from the consumer who is saying, you know what, I have multiple needs, I have very specific preferences. I no longer want to be taking a one-size-fits-all product and multiple versions of that. What I really want is for you to help me find the best possible version of that so that I can be the best possible version of myself. So from a brand perspective, this is about offering personalized recommendations and or the ability to tailor products to the specific needs of the consumer. This can mean taking a simplified approach to product lines and having, let's say, 4 versions of the product and helping the consumer work out which of those are the right one for them, rather than necessarily having a product that is specifically tailored to each and every single person. It does require using customer data, however. So the investment is often in that side where they have to work out how to actually build a data-driven approach to their structure, to their product development, to their marketing. So the 2 examples I had of this are 2 quite different ones. The first is a direct-to-consumer vitamin and supplement business. So this is offered via a subscription box, and it focused originally on very specific needs like digestion, focus, sleep, pregnancy, menopause, immunity, and they also had a multivitamin. But in the last year, they've secured a £10 million investment, which they are investing fully into building a data-first tailored approach to customers. This has been supported by expanding their offering into nutritional supplements, to functional foods, and into beauty, so that they're actually able to create a product that really taps into a person's specific needs. So that's example number one, all about data, and they're busy building that part out of their business model. Moody Month, on the other hand, is an app. It's a daily health and wellness tracker that connects women with solutions that supports their moods, their symptoms, and basically provides solutions such as meditations, such as yoga exercises, such as other types of exercise, activities, even productivity activities for work that are appropriate for that point in a woman's cycle that will make her feel and operate in the best way possible. And that all works by learning from the data that is inputted by the user on their cycle and symptoms, and then using the data that that person has given them. The app is able to forecast symptoms and then provide solutions to those symptoms in advance. So a really great example of this might be where they'll forecast that you're going to have brain fog in XYZ week, and therefore these are the things that you should be doing that week to manage that as best as possible. The third trend is around a shift towards natural and holistic therapies. So this is really where consumers are looking at how they can function better overall. So by putting good stuff in rather than taking especially a traditional medicine, but any sort of solution as and when a problem arises. So trying to just have generally better health, generally better functioning as a whole. So having a holistic viewpoint on themselves, but it does also mean that they are looking for, as part of this trend, more natural and holistic alternatives to traditional medicine. So from a brand perspective, the opportunities here are around exploring new product development opportunities. So whether that's an entirely new product, whether that is an evolution of an existing product and incorporating a more functional benefit to it, for example, or it might be around exploring more natural alternatives to existing ingredients or adding ingredients to existing products so that an existing product can become more functional. So a really great example of that is Twinings. So with the example on the screen there, Twinings Super Blends, they have built on their 300-year-old heritage all around understanding how people love tea and making high quality tea. And they've created what they say are tasty teas for functional needs. And you can see on the screen all of the functional needs that they're addressing with their Super Blends range. So that's an existing company that's been around. They have the heritage to lean on. They've really invested in new product development. Equi London, on the other hand, is a newcomer to the market who said, you know what, the multivitamin market is broken. It's not doing what it needs to do. We are going to redesign it and fix it. So it's another vitamin and supplement brand that completely blurred the lines between vitamins and supplements. And their philosophy is that when your body is balanced on the inside, you look and feel your best, your hair glows, and you perform optimally. And as you can see with the marketing material on the screen there, they claim to have a number of benefits, and this is all in one product. The final trend that I wanted to talk about is around consumer access to your product. And this has really been driven by the huge growth of digital channels, especially mobile. But it's really from a consumer perspective about how they can get the products that they want, the best possible products, the best possible value, with minimal effort. And so what we've seen here is the rise of subscription services. There is a second reason why this particular trend is such a big deal. So obviously from a consumer perspective, this is what they want. Consumers are asking for minimal effort. They want to have things getting to them as soon as possible. But from a brand perspective, increasing their emphasis on direct-to-consumer sales actually allows them to own and manage the final moment of truth. And what that really means is that they can own the customer data. Obviously, this comes back to the other trend around personalization and tailoring recommendations and that sort of thing. But it also means that they can prompt their customers on when they might need top-ups or replacements. It ultimately puts them in the driver's seat. The danger that's happening, or the tug of war, should I rather say, is the rise of intermediaries like Shopify and Klarna, who are then owning that customer data. So this is why this is such a huge opportunity for customers for brands to actually respond to the consumer trend. Of course, it does need to be balanced out with the higher overheads of having to fulfill the order themselves and consumer expectations around free delivery, the return costs, how easy that all is. And there is an argument that this might be easier for newer businesses who don't necessarily have the big bricks and mortar overheads of more traditional establishments. But this is something that is important to emphasize with brands, with clients, around why is this important to consumers and how can they then make it work in their business model. So two very different examples of who is responding to this particular trend. The first is Love Hemp. So Love Hemp is another CBD oil, and they've decided to focus strongly on their D2C sales after they identified that the majority of their sales were coming from traditional retailers like Boots, Amazon, and Holland & Barrett, and only 26% was coming from direct to consumer. So they decided to increase their focus on digital commerce, hiring a whole team of people to lead their digital commerce. And they've been experimenting with different ways of getting product to their consumers more easily. One of those examples including actually Deliveroo. So ordering your CBD oil on Deliveroo, bringing the product closer to the point of need. Skin and Me is another completely different example, and they're super interesting because they're actually tapping into multiple trends. So the first is that they tap into the personalization trend by getting their consumers to take photographs of their skin. They then design a skincare solution that includes prescription level drugs without needing a prescription. And then in terms of responding to the accessibility trend, they then deliver these directly through your letterbox every month, so in a subscription model. And this means that their consumers don't even need to be home to receive it. So they're getting a product that actually taps into everything that they are wanting. So all of their skincare products in one product. So it is a personalized service. It is a product that actually addresses all of their needs in a holistic way. And it's coming through in the letterbox in a subscription. So actually tapping into three trends. So I feel like I would be leaving out a massive chunk of this presentation if I didn't talk about what it means from both our consumers' side, but also from the business side when it comes to marketing in a recession. I love what Ruth Fittick, who is the marketing director at Simply Roasted Crisps, had to say about this. So she says, on the one hand, we know that brands who continued to invest during the last recession bounced back quicker and saw better long-term growth, so we shouldn't cut spend. On the other, striking the right tone with consumers right now is hard. And there's a lot of research to support how we can actually go about this, that right now, consumers are far more informed about looking after themselves in the recession, and actually that a lot of them are thinking that they in fact need to look after themselves even better in order to maintain their physical and mental health and to manage how they're going to feel and respond to the recession or possible recession and the cost of living crisis. But I do think when we're talking to our clients, we need to be realistic about what the whole picture then is and help them to manage their senior clients' expectations on growth and the opportunities that are realistically available, and sort of balancing what they want to do and how they see opportunities against how consumers are making trade-offs and what consumers' needs actually are, to help our clients strike the right tone in their communications and achieve empathy. And finally, how we can ensure that we're helping our clients keep their consumers on their side and not alienating them through a multitude of wrongs, so to speak. So hopefully my final slide is a bit of coals to Newcastle, but I thought it might be a worthy reminder just to have a set of guidelines all in one place about how we can market responsibly in a recession. The first is about helping our clients remain true to their brand values, their tone of voice, their style, and even if they do choose to talk about the recession or address it in any way, to make sure that they're not doing it in a way that comes across as capitalizing on a crisis, which I've heard in research people describing as gross. The second is pretty obvious, but it's about being meaningful in your communications, about being empathetic and connecting with our clients' consumers on a human-to-human level, showing that they do understand where their consumers are coming from and what they're thinking about and what their needs actually are. That said, there is enough negativity in our consumers' lives that we don't need to add to it. There's a lot of evidence that sad advertising doesn't work. So there is permission to a degree to bring some light-hearted joy into their lives, as long as it's not being done in a distasteful or unempathetic way. I think there's a huge opportunity for brands to show their support for their consumers, for example, and how they can help them spend less, because we know that people are looking to make some trade-offs. So an example might be exploring partnerships, possibly even out of category. So let's say you take a mental health brand, they might look at a partnership with cinema and popcorn, for example. Finally, again, this shouldn't have to be said, but just a worthy reminder that if they are going to be talking about the recession anyway, it needs to be done in an authentic way and it needs to be relevant. They need to link it to what their proposition is. The macro trends that we've spoken about today are still visible. Sustainability, holistic well-being, consumers are still incorporating that into their decision making, so we don't have to throw that away. We can still carry on with the brand building and the efforts and strategy that has gone into building the business to where it is right now. And finally, as Ruth's comment on the previous slide made clear, we need to make sure that the brands are still visible. We need to be visible. Going into hiding is not actually going to do anyone any favors. And ultimately, when we come through this, we want to make sure that we have helped our clients build their brand so that they are going to survive it. So that is everything I had planned to talk about today. I'm going to stop sharing. And I see that there is a question from Liz. Can you explain a bit more about how Shopify and Klarna might be viewed as intermediaries and hence impacting the brands? One is a provider of e-commerce solutions and the other of consumer credit and should not ethically be conflicting with brands. Liz, that is such a good question. So basically, they are holding a lot of the final moment of truth when people are purchasing. And so because they actually then collect the customer data, it's not necessarily that they are competing with the brands, just that they are taking the customer data from the brands. Klarna is both a payment solution and a final fulfillment. So Klarna is crossing multiple boundaries in terms of how it is a final intermediary between the consumer and the brand. So that is the main thing that I see as the impact on the brands, is that they're owning the customer data in the final moment of purchase rather than the brand itself. I don't know if that's answered the question.
Well, it has sort of, But I think, isn't that more about the brand needing to make sure that they own? I mean, I question the moment of truth analysis that Google developed. I have to say, it's a sort of nice model, but it's always a bit more complicated than that. Yeah, they own the transaction. They shouldn't own the customer data, because and the brands are paying the likes of Shopify. Shopify provides e-commerce solutions to them. They have a choice of where they go. Klarna is a way that they can improve sales potentially through spreading revenue, or spreading payment. But I'm not sure that they do actually impact the moment of truth. So I was quite intrigued by that. Now, bear in mind, the context I'm coming from is not health and wellness. I'm coming from the context of being mainly a technology researcher.
Perhaps it's the phrase moment of truth. I agree with you about if we take the moment of truth being when they make a decision, when they build a relationship. I think that there are a lot of other influences than when you hit purchase at the very end of the process. So perhaps it was my phrasing to say moment of truth that was perhaps a little bit misleading. Sorry, let's go ahead.
No, I was sorry. No, that was a sort of minor part of it. It was really the sort of how they were stepping in between. That was it. No, I think that's a really good point, and I really found that extremely interesting. So thank you ever so much, Abbey, for taking us through this. I was not trying to be difficult, but it's sort of because there are these issues of, there's always, as soon as intermediaries get involved, there's always the question of who owns the customer.
Yeah,
and it's
and
a
I think
challenge.
Massively, and I think customers are getting a lot more demanding of what's happening with that data and how is it being used and who's actually owning it. And I think it's going to create some very interesting conversations in the future, especially if customers aren't actually sure who's owning that data. If they think it's owned by the brand, but it's actually owned by, let's say, Shopify, that could change things from a privacy perspective.
Yes, for sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. Has anybody else got any questions? Take yourself off mute and ask them if you have. If you don't, then I'll assume you haven't. Okay, well, thank you, Abbey. We got there despite the trials and tribulations. Really appreciate it. I found it fascinating and I hope everybody else did. And thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you for coming. And I'm so sorry about what obviously was my bandwidth going on there. So I'm glad we were able to get there in the end. I'm sorry it ran over a little bit.
No, it's absolutely fine. It was really interesting. And thank you to everybody else who attended. There will be a recording of this up on the website at some stage. We'll let you know when that's going to happen. So thank you very much and have a good evening, everyone, and happy Easter.
Yes.
Indeed.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye.
Easter. Bye.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.